I'll be reading Genesis 2, chapters 2 through 3. And on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation, the creation of man and woman. I'm going to read a second verse. Matthew 11, chapter 11, verses 28 through 30. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden. I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart. You will find rest in your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. All right, go ahead and have a seat. Thank you, Cody. We're going to get into the word, and I'm excited about this one today. The title of our series is Becoming, and this is an apt description of what it means to be human. Becoming, always changing, right? The conditions of our life, the choices, the habits that you have, all of those things, they press on us daily to shape us and to form us into someone. And so the question is, who are you becoming? Who am I becoming in the process, right? I want this question of who are you becoming to stick with us through the whole time, through the whole series, until we wrestle an honest response from ourselves. Who am I becoming? What am I being formed into based on what my calendar looks like, based on how I spend my week, and so on. And that as we wrestle what the true question or the true answer is, who am I really becoming, that we bring that before God. Like I mentioned, here at the home church, we're a community becoming like Jesus, where people can come home to God. But here's the other thing, is that just because we said it out loud, or because we crystallize it, or because we figured out how to, make it a statement, it doesn't mean that it's going to magically transform us into that kind of community. And the point is that intention without commitment of some sort is just wishful thinking. Right? You can want it all you want. You could say, I am becoming the best version of myself. But if there is no commitment, if there is no follow-through, if there's no change in the way that I go about my life, then we're just fooling ourselves. The truth is, real change happens when what we believe aligns with how we actually live, right? When our beliefs line up with actions. And so let me be clear. We're talking about practices, right? Practices such as prayer, fasting, solitude, and generosity, and community. All of these are practices that have been practiced by Jesus and Christian through the centuries. But I want to be clear that the practices or the disciplines on their own, they do not change us. They do not change us in themselves just because we're doing them. But what they allow is for us to position ourselves in the presence of God so that we could be transformed. All right? We got to keep that in our mind, because this is not a call to do more things that are Christianese, but this is an invitation to do the things that lead us into the presence and the power of God, which transforms us. It's the Holy Spirit in those moments when we set time aside. He is the one who is changing us ultimately into the people of love and holiness, all because of Jesus. And that's why we keep returning to these practices again and again, because life has a way of continually pulling us away from our best intentions, right? Like, you might agree with me today, and tomorrow, you and I, we need to be reminded again, because life sweeps in, and responsibilities pile up, and we forget the commitments or the intentions that we wanted there. And so because of that, we need an environment. We need a set of conditions, a good soil to grow in, where we would be formed into the people of love, to become like Him. And so as a result, we've talked about, this is sort of a recap and overview of the one before the previous Sunday, is that the way that we are formed, we need something to continually challenge our minds. That's why we continue to return to the teachings of Jesus, so that our thinking is informed by His way of life. Our minds need to be challenged by the teaching of Jesus. Our bodies and routines also need to have practices that reshape the way we live. And then finally, we need a community of people that are going to keep us accountable. You need all three. You need all three if you're going to change, if you're going to go to the gym, for example, right? You need all three. You need to have the mental idea and a vision of where you're going and continually be reminded of it. You need to implement new habits. You need to start lifting weights that are going to cause tension and stress, and you're going to have to figure out what that's going to look like going forward. And then you need a community. You need somebody else to motivate you, because we know too well how quickly that gym membership goes, into auto pay, and then you're just not showing up anymore. And so the same goes for our spiritual life as well. We need a set of conditions, a good soil in which we can be formed. When all of this comes together, it creates that space in our life. Again, not the practices themselves, but the Holy Spirit is the one who changes us, because we position ourselves to be truly transformed from inside out, something that no amount of self-help could ever accomplish in your life. And so last time, Paul, he's not here today, yeah? Paul invited us, not Apostle Paul, but our Paul on a teaching team, invited us into a practice of prayer, right? Where he was saying, let's consistently set aside, maybe it's a little bit, start with where you're at, a little bit of time, so that you are spending time with God, so that you're ultimately becoming like Jesus. Intentionally and consistently set aside time. He closed with this, he said, put it on your calendar, an appointment with God, right? Because probably you're going to forget. And I'll tell you what, you're probably going to forget that you put the appointment as well. I've done that in the past. You need somebody else to remind you. And in his case, like he was saying, Ilona, his wife, is there to remind him. We're talking about the same thing with my wife as well. You need to have somebody, right, who holds you to that commitment. But begin with little, so that your life consistently begins to have a connection with God. Today I want to open with two cautionary tales. This lady on the screen, her name is Miwa Sado. She was a 31-year-old political reporter in Tokyo. She worked for NHK, which is Japan's national broadcaster. In the months before she died, she logged 159 hours and 37 minutes of overtime. The month before that, 146 hours of overtime. She rarely took days off. She worked nearly every night until midnight, covering back-to-back elections. And so according to Business Insider, on the day in July 2013, or one day in July 2013, she collapsed from a congestive heart failure. She was found in her apartment still holding her phone, right? Her death was ruled out to be a case of karoshi, Japanese word that means death by overwork. Karoshi. And yes, in that year, her death became, in a way, as a national wake-up call. Japan started changing laws, and it took them a while. By 2019, they implemented a law, which I don't know if that's enough or not, but they're like, everybody has to take 5 days mandatory vacation. So, you figure whether they change things or not. But they have long carried a reputation for being the most overworked nations in the world. And this term that you see on the screen, karoshi, it was born as a way to name the phenomena that was happening of the droves of professionals who were dying beginning from 1990s from stress-induced heart attacks and strokes. This became a pandemic for them and still is to a large degree. It's a tragic picture. And you might say, Alex, that's extreme. That could never be us. Not here. Like, we know how to chill or whatever, right? But the truth is, we are ramping up towards the same direction. And the speed of technology and the speed of how things are moving in the world is not helping at all. Like, our desire to have stuff and to reach certain milestones for ourselves and for our families is always just reaching new heights. A new project, a new house, a new boat, a new piece of land. And I'm talking a lot about myself as well. A new car, new toys, new experiences. And many of us continue to do this by choice. Maybe we're not forced by our bosses to work hours, but we just force ourselves to work insane amount of hours. So you're looking at that number. Well, an average American has 300,000 items in their home. 300,000 items in their home. And I've been thinking recently about all this. What are we living for? I have probably more than 300,000, I'm just telling you. Like, what are we living for? What are we giving up? Our precious time, the thing that is the most treasured possession, and we're just working so that we could have more of something. Over half of us here in the United States consistently work more than 40 hours a week. Half of America is already pressing into overtime, and about 40% of that half is actually working 50 hours or more. And many of us carry the jobs into our homes now that we work remote. We answer emails, checking messages, finishing just one more thing, either for work or for myself. And it's costing us. Before the invention of the light bulb, an average person slept 11 to 12 hours per day, or per night. Per night, yes. 11 to 12 hours per night. Now we're averaging 6, 7 hours. No wonder that the studies report that only 8% of Americans feel fully rested. And over 80% report feeling stressed most days. Right? So yes, karoshi is too out there, too wild, right, of a thing like that's never going to happen. But yet at the same time, we are working ourselves to death, maybe just at a slower scale. A while back, Desert News, a news publication, published a letter exchange between the publisher and the mother who discovered a letter that her daughter wrote earlier but never sent. Her 13-year-old daughter wrote this. And by the way, as you think, the daughter is talking about the mother, if you're a father, put yourself in there. If you're maybe in a different kind of relationship, maybe you live with your parents, you're a student, like substitute it with somebody who's dear in your life. She says, this 13-year-old daughter wrote, "Dear Abby," to the editors, "my mother is a workaholic. She works at work, at home, after dinner, and after all hours. She never has any fun. I'm afraid she's on the verge of nervous breakdown, if not already over the edge. I've talked to her, so have my brother and my father. How do I send the message to mom that life is not just paperwork and deadlines, but fun and happiness?" Signed out of ideas. And the reason the mother sent the letter in, or had to send the letter in, not the daughter, because soon after writing this, her daughter died in her sleep of respiratory failure. She was only 13 years old. Can you guess how mom responded to that, right? You can, because when we're confronted with this tragic story, we're like, of course, her mom would say, like, I'd do anything if I knew that this was going to be the outcome of it. This is what she wrote. It's exactly what's in our minds. She said, "Oh, how I wish that I could change the past and spend less time working, volunteering, etc., and spend more time with Kelsey, her daughter. But that's impossible. What I can do is be a better mother to my son and pass along my daughter's message to you readers." She went on to say, "I wish I had listened before it was too late to spend more time with Kelsey." Too late. The real question, why do we have to wait until it's too late? Why do we wait until time runs out or tragedy strikes, right? Or just the flow of time finally confronts us that, the time has gone by, and here I am already at this stage of life. Why is it just in the moments like these we gain clarity on life? We can see things clearly, what really mattered. We have to accept the fact that we live in a world of exhaustion, and it's not slowing down. It's a world of burnout and stress all around us, and that we have to do something about it, because truly deep in our heart we want to. In this restless world, Jesus and the teaching of Jesus offer us another way, a way that leads us from restlessness into restfulness. And so today's practice that we're discussing is Sabbath. It's an act of resistance in a way against the tyranny of hurry, of just next thing and next thing. It's a way of pausing and slowing down. Sabbath is an ancient practice that's been practiced for many ages. But it's a practice that invites you into a rest as a regular rhythm of life, as something that not you just do occasionally, but you are living in the rhythm where you're consistently finding yourself going to rest. Sabbath in the scripture, if you were to read about it, is just a day set aside for rest. And that's what we'll be talking about today. But it goes all the way back to creation. This is where we get the idea of rest. And so Cody opened up today with reading Genesis passage, where it says that on the seventh day when God finished his work that he had done, he rested on the seventh day from all his work. And then he blessed it and called it holy. Here in Home Church, you'll often hear us talk about coming home to God. And that's why we named it Home Church as well, right? Like we want you to be on that journey from being spiritually lost to spiritually arriving in the open arms of the Father who is always waiting and is always welcoming. And so this is part of what it means to come home to God. To come home to God is to return to the way that we were designed by our Creator. And a lot of times we'll go back to Genesis to be like, the way we were created speaks a lot about how we should live, right? And this is one of those things. We go back to rediscover, in this case, the rhythm that we were made for. Because God's ways, they're not only true, but they're what's best for us ultimately. And so any Christian who has walked with Jesus for some time will tell you, and often to our surprise, that again and again we find how much God's design and purposes are so much better and wiser in our life than what we ever can come up with. And we try our own ways, and we try to work against the grain of how we were designed oftentimes, only to discover that when we finally relent and surrender, we say, whoa, this is crazy. How did I not come to this sooner? How, especially compared to the hurt and fractured ways that our culture, celebrates life, how different life with God is. And if you're thinking, to yourself, well, seventh day, it's the way the stars maybe rotate, and that's just an arbitrary kind of number that we came up with, and we could just switch to something else, couldn't we? Well, as you might know, we did indeed try switching up, and by we I mean humanity, or in this case, French. The French people did, and on September 22nd, 1792, they decided to switch from 7-day week to a 10-day week. Yeah, they made it a law, and they changed their calendar and everything. It was this revolutionary movement to erase both the religious ideas of the days, but they were primarily, obviously, overthrowing the royalty, right? But with royalty came the religion as well, and so away with religion, away with royalty, right? We're going to rewrite the world. And so ultimately, they made this decision to switch to a 10-day week. But thankfully, it didn't work, because people were required to work now 9 out of 10 days, and as you can imagine, it didn't really create much more productivity. Instead, it created a nationwide resentment that finally was relieved by Napoleon 13 years later. So for 13 years, they tried their utopian way of running a 10-day week, and it didn't work out. Because you see, in creation, we believe, God launched a heartbeat of a weekly life. That's not just a story for us to sort of imagine how things have come about, but there was also a rhythm that was launched. It demonstrated to us a way of life. And if you look closely at the passage that we just read, what you would notice that God created in 6 days, and then he rests on the 7th. But for humanity, for Adam and Eve, and for the rest of us, right, our first full day as humanity began with a day of rest. Right? We launched into existence from rest. So before they work, they rested. And I think that there's a demonstration of grace in that rhythm as well. Because for many of us, myself included, and it might be still, as we were growing up, we were embedded with this idea that rest is deserved, right? That rest is something that you have to work really hard for, no matter how hard it is. And everybody has different hard standards. And some of us work ourselves literally to, becoming ill, right? Because we have this idea that rest is deserved. Work hard enough and then earn your rest. But in Sabbath, you are invited to receive this gift of grace. Receive it as a gift and not as a reward for performance, right? Which goes along with everything that God proposes and gives. He doesn't say, earn it. He doesn't say, change your life and then I will give you a new one. He says, come to me, and this is a gift that I give to you. And the tragedy of human life is that we leave so many good gifts on the table that God has offered us as humanity, right? And we just yet want to do our own way and continue to beat into a wall, right, where he provided a way as a gift of grace. And so when you look at Genesis narrative, you find this peculiar thing. There was evening, and there was morning the first day. In Hebrew culture, from the beginning of time, a new day begins at sundown. Isn't it interesting? Your new day begins with you going to sleep. Here's how Eugene Peterson, and pastor and an author, puts it. The Hebrew evening-morning sequence, it conditions us to the rhythms of grace. We go to sleep, and God begins his work. The idea is that both the week begins with rest, and our days begin with rest, if we look in the scriptures. And so, 2 things happen. First of all, he rested from all his work on the 7th day, as an example for us to take on. God finished his creative work in the universe, right? It doesn't mean that he doesn't sustain or work. He works daily. Every single second, he sustains everything. But his major creative work was launched in motion, and he rests. It's all, it's like when a project is well done. You step back and you just look at it and it's done well, right? And it's an example for us. And so he does two things. First is he blessed the seventh day. And all that means is the word blessed or blessing, it's to speak goodwill towards us, right? That we might find goodness in rest. That this day would be something that is bringing goodness into our life. Sabbath is a day of rest. It's a gift. It's a gift to humanity in a world that will never run out of things to do. You know what I'm talking about, right? Like there's always something else to do. And so this is a gift to us to be refreshed. This is a day, this day has a way of bringing about life into our souls, refreshing us from the inside as we trust the Creator and lean into His grace and not just sing with our words, He's got the whole world in His hands, but actually live like it's true and actually stop and slow down and say, yeah, He's got the whole world in His hands, and this is my way of surrendering to that. And then the second thing that we see there, He blessed it and He made it holy, or called it holy? Made it holy, right? He made it holy. So what do you think? What are you thinking of if I tell you the word holy, right? Like, what comes up in your mind? Sometimes I wonder because we have like these weird ideas that, maybe they're not so weird because we're formed. We're formed by an environment. Maybe you've been to church, or maybe you've heard it on the news, this word, or I don't know, on a podcast, and you heard somebody talk about holy, and that's how you got your idea of what holy is. But what I love about it here is that God is saying rest is holy. Have you thought about that? Rest is holy. He made the seventh day of rest as holy, where you do nothing. You don't contribute, you don't bring anything. You just receive the gift of grace. You want to become more like Jesus? Do you want to be more holy? Learn to rest like Him. That's a good place to start. Learn to rest like Him. We look at His ministry, the Son of God coming to earth, becoming like us so that He could provide a way for us, and yet He regularly practiced Sabbath, taking a day of rest. Don't you have a mission to do? Jesus, don't you have a world to save? Isn't every minute count? I mean, because you know what it's like, right? Like you and me, we've got projects. We're like, well, I got stuff. I can barely take a breather. Like I got to move on to the next thing. And here's the Son of God who's got the biggest mission in the world to do, to invite us back into communion with the Father, with the Creator. And yet, during His life on this earth, He regularly takes Sabbath, 24-day of ceasing, stopping, delighting, and worshiping in God. Rest is holy. Rest is essential for you to be a disciple of Jesus. That's kind of the main point that I'm trying to share with you today. Rest is essential for you as a disciple of Jesus. You need to learn how to rest and rest well. It teaches us how to be aware of and not neglect our limits, right? Sabbath offers us a rest in the middle of our to-do lists. So yes, this day is holy, and rest itself is holy. Now, before we ever got to the commandment, because if you've been in church around for a while, you know that the fourth commandment, well, maybe you don't know that it's the fourth. I can barely remember sometimes which one is it. But you know that it's somewhere in the commandments, that you got to keep the seventh day holy, right? But before we got it as a commandment, which comes all the way later in the book of Exodus, thousands of years later, we are shown that this way of living life was built into the fabric of the universe. Right? That our bodies were created in such a way that the rest replenishes and recharges us, and that this was intended by God to be so. And so when it's finally commanded in Exodus, it began with one word. It wasn't just do this day. It was remember the Sabbath. In other words, remember the way that the world was made. Return to that. Remember how life actually works. This is going to be good for you. And so in our time, yes, that's not a rule to obey. That's not something that you are required to do or something that you're even commanded to do. But it's an invitation to live life the way it was meant to be. As Wayne Mueller, a pastor and a therapist, he puts it this way. The Sabbath is not a burdensome requirement from some law-giving deity where it's like you ought or you'd better or you must. But rather it's a remembrance of a law that is firmly embedded in the fabric of nature. It is a reminder of how things really are, the rhythmic dance to which we all unavoidably belong. It's built into the fabric of the universe, and you do well to thrive and flourish if you line up with the way that you were created, the way you were meant to be. And so in Sabbath, I'll talk about four things. It calls us to four responses if you are to become a practitioner of just setting time aside to be with God. It calls us to four responses, and they're all related and embedded into the meaning of the word Sabbath. This is a Jewish or Hebrew word. And those 4 steps are stop, rest, delight, and worship. And as you consider, because remember, the invitation is not for you to just listen to this amazing TED Talk or whatever you think, right? Like when we just kind of take the information in, but so that we practice it, so that we live it out, so that we implement it into our rhythms of life, so that we become more like Jesus. So as you consider how you're going to practically bring it into your week, or simply even just to be more intentional with rest, let these movements guide you in your time with God and others. So I'm going to talk briefly about each one. The first one is stop. The word Sabbath that I keep mentioning in Hebrew is Shabbat. You can see it on the screen right there. Just like you, I can barely read that. But it's a Shabbat, right? It's this idea that literally means to stop. Like seize. Like pull over to the curb, shut down the engine, put it in park. Complete stop, seize. Don't do anything. And honestly, it's probably the hardest thing for us to do. As you know, it wasn't that long ago where most activity came to a halt at night and on the weekends. I'm talking about here in the West in particular, but also across the world, where just within the last half a century, the TV began to stay on longer into the night, right? And the late night shows appeared, and then it was like to the midnight, and then finally it's just a 24-hour cycle, right? The stores and the roads, and you had the 24-hour gas station pop up, and all sorts of things that are just right there for you to serve you at any time of day. And now the stores and the roads, they all remain filled through all the hours. And finally, today, we're just sitting, we're trying to process this. We arrived at an age where the stream of information and the movement from one thing to another has gone to such an extreme point. We're just like a blur at this point. The city never sleeps. It never skips a beat. And it just keeps going and going. And so do we along with it. If we're not stopping, if we're not resisting, if we're not pushing back and saying, I'm going to do something about this. I want to lean into the way God made me to be. As Pastor Eugene Peterson once said, Sabbath is the time to set aside to do nothing. Just stop so that we could receive everything. To set aside our anxious attempts to make ourselves useful. To set aside our tense restlessness. To set aside our media-saturated boredom. So the first point is to just stop. The invitation is I understand you're in different seasons. Whether you could do a full day or you begin with something little, stop in that moment. Have a moment where you stop once a week and you rest from things. And that's the next one, is you move into rest. You all remember that God rested on Shabbat, right? And we, as creation, are invited into the same. Rest from what? Rest from working, but also rest from thinking about working. Right? Because sometimes you stop doing things, but your mind is just going on and on and on. And so what do you do in those moments? One of the best things is probably to pull out your phone. That's not a good idea. Don't pull out your phone. Because what happens when you pull out your phone? Your Sabbath goes to the side, right? Maybe have a sticky note or something nearby. Write down the things, right? And say, this can wait, right? I mean, unless it's something really urgent and cannot wait and you forgot to do something really bad, do it. But the point is, lay things aside. Rest from things. Rest from working. Rest from even thinking about working. We talked about practicing the way course that we're doing, and as practicing the way puts it, there's also an invitation to rest from wanting and worrying, because those two are really powerful forces in our life. One is wanting. Why do we continue work? Because we want something, right? Like we think that we got to set up the future for our kids. I got to get my degree. I got to, get a better job, a promotion. I got to put in the hours. We want something. And so we're continually driven by our wants, our cravings. Sabbath invites us to rest our cravings. And so will fasting, by the way, right? It's a way to say pause on the cravings. I'm not going to be driven by the desires that continually rise up within me, because they will never be satisfied. What happens when you reach the next milestone? You're like, well, this is cool. What's next? And I want something else. But the other part of it is that we have sometimes an aversion or worrying that pushes us to work. So for example, we're trying to avoid something. Like if I'm not going to do this, you know what's going to happen. And so I continually have to keep running away from this problem. And so I'm worrying. Sabbath invites us to rest from both our cravings and our aversions, our worrying or our wanting and our worrying. We know this from studies too, and also from our experience as well. You can agree that productivity goes down significantly past a certain amount of hours. That the more you work, not the better work you produce, right? That at some point you have to rest, because we become more irritated, impatient, stressed, emotionally distant, disconnected. we need rest. And so rest is this second movement. It's putting aside the idea of needing to produce or to finish just one more thing. Just rest. Life is short. You heard that? Life is short. And I'm sad because, as you know, this phrase doesn't mean anything to us anymore. Like, we just kind of say it, and then what? We're back into the stream of things. Like, and we're continually just rushing to the next thing. And then we'll say, well, life is short. And those of us who are probably, or those of you who are older, and I feel I'm getting older too, right? Like, we're all getting older. And at certain stages, you just keep saying that. But man, life does fly by really fast. And especially when we're struck with tragedy or something that slows us down in our tracks, we're like, whoa, how did the time pass by so quickly? But the sad part about it is it is going by fast, and most of the time, we're oblivious to how restless we are and how we're just moving at the speed of light. Mark Buchanan, a science writer and a pastor speaking on Sabbath, said it this way. He's like, Sabbath, it's a sheer gift. It's the rest we take smack dab in the middle of tasks and obligations without apology, without guilt, and for no better reason than God told us we could. I love that. Right? Rest. Stop and rest. Now, the third one that I invite you into is delight. And the idea here is that Sabbath was never meant to be this obligation that is put on you. It was never meant to be a burden, like a religious burden. It was not meant to take away your freedom. It's not a duty even of any sort. Sabbath was meant to be as a day of feasting and delighting. It's a day of celebration, really, in the goodness and the provision of God. And here's the key. You're better off to do it with others. That's how it was meant to be celebrated, in a community, with your family, with your friends, with your spouse, with your parents. This is a day of rest. Spending time on the activities that are not work, that are not producing, that are not getting my self-esteem built up by the things that I do. Something that recharges you. Think of those activities. This is what you should be doing on a Sabbath. Maybe it's a walk in the park. Maybe it's spending a good conversation with a friend, having a good meal together, playing board games with your family. And be wise about it, because my kids would say, when we talked about Sabbath, what would recharge you? Playing video games all day, Dad? Right? And we're like, okay, well, yeah. No, probably not. We know very well, right, that screens, when you're done either watching YouTube for who knows how long or playing video games or scrolling through social media, it never leaves you feeling recharged. It almost always drains you. It's like you've experienced a social connection of some sort that you were craving, but you've never actually were with real people, right? And it leaves us empty and drained. So be wise about the things that recharge you. Look for activities that actually build you up and give you a breath of fresh air, that put away all the worries on pause for a moment. Do something that brings you joy, and do it with others as well. So Sabbath is an invitation to delight. It's an invitation to the best day of your week. Look forward to it, right? Once you work into it, because just like with everything else, you have to get used to it. The first times you do Sabbath, it's kind of weird, or you take a long rest, or like solitude is the same thing. When you just sit there and put the worries to aside, you all of a sudden start to sense all sorts of emotions. Why? Because so far, you've just been suppressing them, and you've been running away from them, and now it starts to bubble up. And so at first, it might feel like a lot of sadness might come up. Right? You got to be aware of that. And it might feel like, oh, this is weird. Like, why am I doing this? Or why am I spending this time? I could be doing something else. But press into it. And over time, it will become a delight for you. It will become a time, like a refuge, like a little thing that you build where you are just present in the moment. It's like a piece of eternity locked in time right now, in the now. It's a place where we get to connect with God, or place, time, and day where we get to connect with God and others in an unhurried way. Not too long ago, there was a medical study done by U.S. National Institute on Aging. A large community of Christians who practice Sabbath regularly were studied. And they found that not only they were much happier than the general population, there's an actual study that was conducted, but they lived, or tend to live, 11 years longer than the average person. Come on. Who would not want 11 years added to their life? And if there is a way, sign me up for it. And so this is one of those things. Again, this was a Christian group as well, and there could have been other factors, but they were regularly practicing Sabbath as well. Sabbath practice regularly becomes a place where you are refreshed, spiritually, emotionally, physically. And that delight then transforms your life literally, as we see. Like, it literally transforms your life as you find yourself delighting in God and others. And so finally, the last of the four things, or the four movements, or the four invitations that I want to give you is that Sabbath is also a day for worship, right? It was a day to honor God by responding to His great design for us. Now, yes, it's also gathering together and worshiping collectively if your Sabbath is practiced on Sunday, but it's also just in taking rest, just in saying, Lord, I'm actually going to try, or the Creator, the way you created me, I'm going to align myself with the way that you've designed me to be. When we stop, we already worship. We already give Him the glory as the one who runs my life and not me and my to-do lists, right? We proclaim through our bodies and our closed laptops and phones for the time being, whatever time you can afford, but hopefully you can work up to that day or full day, that we trust and love and delight in Him as our Creator. And so we stop and rest and delight, not because everything is gone or done from our to-do lists, but because we recognize that He is God and we are not, right? We stop, rest, delight, and we worship. In Colossians 1:17, there's a great reminder for all of us. I hope you can resonate with this. This passage talks about Jesus, and it says, and He is before all things, and in Him all things hold together. I know sometimes you might feel like, man, you're just holding everything together in your home, or you're just holding everything together for your family or for yourself or for your plans or your job or whatever it may be. But this Sabbath is a reminder that He's the one who holds all things together. That yes, the pressures might be there tomorrow, on Monday, or whatever day that, follows after your Sabbath. They're going to be there. But this is a moment to surrender and say, at the end of the day, I'm not holding it all together. It might feel like that. Life might have pressed me into this moment. But I got to acknowledge that He's the one who holds all things together. And so on this day of rest, you take time to worship God together with the church, if you're Sabbathing on the day. If it's not Sunday for you, or there's no church available, or you can't be with others, then do it alone. But it's an opportunity for you to also worship Him. Andy Crouch, a Christian author, writes, there's perhaps no single thing that could better help us recover Jesus' lordship over us in our frantic and power-hungry world than to allow Him to be the Lord of the rest, our rest, as well as the Lord of our work, right? Allow Him to also be the Lord of your rest as well as your work in the rest of your life. So Sabbath is an act of resistance, but it's also an act of worship. And so the invitation is for you and for me is to stop, rest, delight, and worship. But our exhaustion, when we are exhausted, it's not just physical, right? It's also emotional. It's also spiritual. Rich Villota is a pastor from New York and an author in spiritual formation. He puts it this way. There is a fatigue of the body. We can resonate with that, right? We don't get as much sleep as we need. We push our bodies to the limit and live off cups of coffee and Red Bull. There's also a fatigue of the mind. In any given day, we are bombarded with ceaseless information that we have no time to absorb or process. And ultimately, there is a fatigue of the soul, right? Because we are people who have little margin to be with God and to foster a life-given rhythm for the long haul, something that will sustain us for a good life. So above all else, Sabbath is an invitation to find true rest in Jesus, right? It would be weird for me to preach a discipline for you and not to say that, hey, it's about Him. It is about finding rest in Him ultimately. That's what gives this day, the rest day, that's what gives it its life-giving power. Because you're not just taking a day off, you're taking a day to delight in the one who holds your life together. That's important. Otherwise, you're just vacationing, or you're just taking a break. Jesus invites you and me by saying, come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, all who are burned out, overworked, busy, anxious, running. And He says, I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart. And then, what? You will find rest for your souls. We don't find rest just in taking a day off. It is important that the true rest needs to be wholesome. It needs to be your mind and your body and your soul. And it only found in the one who is the Lord of the Sabbath, the one who calms our hearts and brings rest to our souls. I love returning to this paraphrase by Eugene Peterson because I think it cuts to the core of our contemporary problem. On the same passage that we just read, he paraphrases it this way. Are you worried? Are you worn out? Burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a a real rest. Do you hear that today? Right? The invitation is for you and for me. God is reminding us that maybe what you need most is not more things to do. Right? Not even for God or others. That today, just for today, for this Sunday, the invitation for you and for me is to simply stop and rest in Him. Are you taking care of yourself? Are you stepping back into that rhythm for which you were created? I love how one commentary put it this way. In planning ahead and setting aside a day that is different from all other days, we create a space for our souls to catch up with our bodies, to breathe deeply and to come home to ourselves. Netflix notifications and other counterfeits of rest can wait till Monday. Right? The invitation is for our souls to catch up with their bodies. And don't misplace the importance of that. Both need rest, but it's your soul that needs to find true rest in Jesus. And when we ignore the way that we were designed, it catches up to us. You might say, I can't afford to rest. Right? Like I can't afford to take a day off, a whole 24 hours. But have you ever considered the cost of not doing so? That's a really good question for me oftentimes, because I might say I don't have time for this, but have you considered the cost of not stepping into this? Because on the other side of it is burnout, stress, weak immune system, brain fog, frayed relationships, and distance from God. That is the cost of not stepping in and building out time in the week, every week, where you are resting for whatever time that you can afford right now, and then build it up from there. Sabbath is not an addition to your life. Let me be clear about that. It is not an addition. The request is not for you to add something else on your busy to-do list. It is an invitation to realignment of how life actually works. You could take it or not. But when you take it, you're not adding something. You're just putting yourself back to how you were designed so that you could thrive and flourish even amongst the to-do lists and the never-ending tasks. And so today the invitation from Jesus is, come to me, he says. Come to me to find rest. Come and I'll teach you and I'll rewire your mind so that you could finally see how you can begin pushing away the things that tend to just run you into the ground. Come as you are. Come tired. Come busy. You don't need to change drastically your life. Just come to Him and begin slowly allowing Him to reshape you. It's time for you and me to slow down. And maybe you're thinking, have you seen my schedule? Do you know the pressure that I'm under? Right? I kept bringing this up. Maybe you're working 2-3 jobs. I know some of you are, just trying to make ends meet. Maybe you're a full-time student and you're like, but I got soccer and I've got musical instruments and I've got, the classes that I have to do. And I also want to hang out with friends. Like, have you seen my schedule? Where can I build this in? Or maybe you're a mom. And right now it's like 150% of your time goes to your baby or to all of your kids or to running the household. And, as most mothers are, it's like it feels like you're never off. Like, have you seen my schedule? And I want to say I hear you, and the invitation is still the same, because the invitation is not to just like revamp your life. Begin where you are, not where you think you should be. Right? Just begin that resistance. Begin the surrendering sometime. Yes, it's going to look different in your season of life. I don't expect you, to be like, okay, if you've never done it, now you're doing a 24-hour. Start small. Maybe it's going to be 3 to 4 hours this next week. Just 3 to 4 hours where you put your phone to the side, where you just sit in silence for a bit. Or maybe you just catch up with a friend you haven't seen in a while and put everything on pause. Stop, rest, delight, worship. Begin with where you are. I'm coming to an end here. I know I'm a bit over time. I heard this illustration recently. Imagine a locomotive, a train, big train, with its power and how it's moving. It's fast. It's unstoppable. It sadly takes them really long to stop. Even if you pull the brake on, it just keeps on going. It's powerful. But that power only matters if it stays on rails. Nobody looks at a train like that and says, so much power, so much just beauty in how it was designed. Wouldn't it be great if it just went into the city and actually was able to drive all over the place? And as you know, when it does that, it does not look good at all. When the trains go off the rails, it does not look beautiful at all. It's just destruction all over the place. The power only matters in this train when it stays on the rails. The rails do not restrict the train or the locomotive. The rails liberate the train to be what it's meant to be. It enables it to move it forward with purpose and direction. And so I bring that up as an illustration because all of our disciplines in life are meant to align us with the greater purposes in life. They're not meant to be like, well, now you have to pray, and now you have to fast, and now you have to practice Sabbath, and now you have to practice generosity. It's not a have to. It's an invitation to live life in the way that you were designed to. And you can ignore it. Work against the grain of the universe, and you'll get a bunch of splinters over time. The invitation is to realign ourselves so that there, in the presence of God, intentionally, through the Holy Spirit, we could be transformed and healed and restored. And Sabbath is the same way. Whether it's any of the practices that we talked about or Sabbath itself, it's not meant to hold you back from doing work. It's rather to bring you into holy rest. Bring you into the presence of God and others. And so, I'm almost done. I'm going to read the longish passage right now as my closing thing. It's going to be longish, okay? So I'm just, giving you a little pause so you wake up and kind of, all right, another. All right? It's going to be longish. But the reason I want to read it, because it's poetic. I think it speaks to, it's like a painting, a word painting of a Sabbath, all right? This is a reflection on Sabbath by a Christian mother and wife and author, Ruth Haley Barton, and then we'll pray afterwards. She goes to say, I don't know everything there is to know about Sabbath. In this discipline, as much as any other, I'm a beginner. But what I do know is there have to be times in your life when you move slow. Times when you walk rather than run, allowing your body to settle into each step. Times when you sit and gaze admiringly at loved ones rather than racing through an agenda. Times when you receive food and drink with gratitude and humility rather than gulping it down on your way to something more important. Times when hugs linger and kisses are real. There have to be times when you read for the sheer pleasure of it, marveling at the beauty of words and writers' endless creativity in putting them together. There have to be times when you sink into the comforts of home and become human again rather than using home as a hotel or a fast food restaurant. Times when you light a candle and find place inside you that loves and then pray out of that place. There have to be times when you let yourself feel what you feel. When you let your tears come rather than blinking them back because you don't have time to cry. There have to be times to be there, to be the creature, meaning created creature, softer, more vulnerable, more human, rather than always being tough, defended, and in control. There have to be times to sit with your gratitude for the good gifts in your life that get forgotten in a rush. To celebrate and play and roll down hills and splash in water and spread paint on paper or walls or each other. There have to be times to sit and wait for the fullness of God that replenishes body, mind, and soul. If you can even stand to be so full. There has to be time for fullness of time, or time is meaningless. Would you please stand if you are willing and able as we go to a prayer here? I want to close with just a few lines that I wrote at the end here. Rest is holy. Rest is holy, and it's a beautiful thing. And it seems like it's an easy thing. It should be an easy thing. But for us, it comes at a great cost for some reason in this time and age. So let us, Home Church, let us commit to recover the rhythm of rest in our life through the practice of Sabbath, whatever that means like for you practically. Lean into it. Let's ask God to grant us the wisdom and courage to fight against the tyranny of hurry. Right? Let's invite Him so that He rewrites our lives in such a way that we truly become people of love, become like Jesus, and become people of holiness. Let us pray.